Good morning, everybody. I am Jean-Michel Severino, and my job here this morning will be to facilitate this panel and help our colleagues to make the best of our time. It's really a great pleasure to be again this year for the third year in a row for this agricultural session, and I wish to thank the organizer, Thierry, Mrs. Kwon, also for insisting on having this team around here. And we have a wonderful panel again to address these very important issues. Since last year, for those who attended this session, many things have happened. Prices have gone in all the directions. We have sort of swallowed, to a certain extent, the consequences of the Ukrainian-Russia war, to a certain extent. But we have also witnessed what we thought would take place, extreme weather events, droughts, floods, etc., that have continued disrupting not only the economics of food and production and consumption, but also ways of living. And but the major structural issues as inequality, hunger, poverty, access to food have not changed that much, and I think our panelists will insist on that. And all this is also linked to a kind of resurgence of agro issues in the heart of our geopolitical agenda. Let's think, for those who are familiar with who are in Latin America and Europe, the Mercosur debate, which has shown how sensitive those issues were, even in industrialized countries. What is nevertheless striking to me, and that would be a question for us, I think, question is how those agricultural issues nevertheless have remained very low on our debating agenda. We have had three very important multilateral discussions this semester. COP29 on climate, COP16 on biodiversity, and the negotiation of the new plastics treaty, a very important environmental discussion. And in all those three discussions, agricultural issues have been basically nowhere. Very low on the agenda, very low prevalence in this discussion. And this lack of focus on what is probably the most critical with health of our global issues when it comes to the sustainability of our livelihoods is of course a big question. So to deal with these immense issues in a short time, we have once more a wonderful panel. We'll have again today with us Máximo Torero Cullen from Rome, which is very prestigious for us. Hi, Máximo. Máximo is the chief economist of FAO. He's a former World Bank executive director for a large group of Latin American countries, and former head of division of markets and trades at the IFRI, and many other things. And he will enlighten us with the global approach of FAO. We have the pleasure also to have Philippe Chalmin, who is extremely well known as the founder and still leader of Cyclope, a major report on commodity prices, including agriculture, of course. He's a professor emeritus at Dauphine. Probably, Philippe, your first retirement issues from the professor activity. And he has written 40 books. For the French one, I recommend the Journal de la Dissolution, quite recent one, and the brief history of the 29th century, quite exciting book. We are also honored and privileged to have Bayu Krisnamurthi with us. He was Vice Minister for Agriculture of Indonesia, and now is a professor at Bogor Agricultural University, at a former and founder and chairman of Inclusive and Social and Sustainable Agribusiness Initiative. So he is incredibly knowledgeable about our issues, and he is not only a regional anchor, but a global vision. And the same thing as Kamel. Kamel Abdallah We are also so happy to have us with you as a local of the conference, but also somebody who has an incredible breadth of knowledge around not only global, but also the regional situation. You have been an academic. At the beginning of a career, you have led several very important businesses in the food industry. And now you're leading an Egyptian company, sugar company, a major agricultural company, which gives you a hands-on approach to our issues. And finally, last but not the least, Jean-Marc Astorg is the Director of Strategy at CNES, the French Space Agency. It may seem surprising to have you here, but you have a very special entry in our issue which deserves quite a focus, which you will develop, and that shows how disruptive innovation adds to our global landscape, and how, and this is an issue which is dear to some of us, introducing links with other disciplines, areas, etc., is something that is a critical experience. Agriculture is not only about agriculture, it's about many other things. So once we have had this first round of 6 minutes each, thank you very much for your discipline in advance. I will just put you a short question before we turn to the audience. And without any other consideration, Máximo, are you ready to start?
No, sure. Thank you so much. A pleasure to be with you again. What I will do is I will present a very small presentation showing the situation today and the situation tomorrow so that we can open the discussion. If you can please share the slides. Okay, can you see the slides? Because
yes, we see your slide.
Okay, can we move please to the slide of today and where there are some indicators? Because I cannot see them.
Yes, we have it. We have today economic inequalities.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. So this is the photograph of today. We have 733 million people in chronic hunger. This is the midpoint estimated in the latest SOFI. We have people that lack regular access to food of 2.3 billion. And we have an affordable healthy diets access of 2.8 billion people. And when we look at the emergency world, where we use the concept of acute food insecurity, which is a short-term comfort concept, we're talking of 281.6 million people. So the numbers are terrible. They are basically the same in the last 3 years. There has not been any significant improvement, although there are some improvements, especially in South. Now, this is in a context where conflicts have been increasing, climate events have been increasing in frequency and intensity, and of course, we have the economic and financial situation that we'll elaborate at the end. But also in a context where we have huge inequalities. So basically, this food operate was to provide the food for the right to food is facing these risks and uncertainties and challenges that we need to look at carefully. Next, please. So here you just see the map of the global food crisis report. The dark blue are crises that are happening permanently. Lighter blue are crises because of, for example, of migration, like in the case of the Andean countries in South America because of the migration from Venezuela. But this is the 281.6 million people. But the most important, if we move to the next slide, is that for consecutive years, this prevalence rate has remained stubbornly high, between 21 to 23%, despite record levels of humanitarian financing, which tells you a lot because it tells you that this will keep increasing these needs. But not only that, it tells you that 36 countries and territories have featured in this report for the past 8 years, highlighting the difficulty of exiting acute food insecurity conditions when they become acute. So countries repeat, and 19 are defined as both protracted and major food crisis. So many of these countries of the 59 are coming back, and we cannot resolve yet that problem. Next, please. Now, in terms of the climate, we have trespassed 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries. And what this is telling us, if we move to the next slide, is that the biophysical dynamics are no longer linear, and the speed of the problems will be increasing, potentially exponentially, and there are tipping points that could be crossing. So what we have certainty about is that the frequency of the climate and the intensity of the climate events will keep increasing. An example in looking at daily temperature anomalies in the next slide, you will see that we already have passed in 2015 the first days above the 1.5 degrees Celsius. But in February 2024, we have 4 consecutive days above the 2 degrees Celsius. So these climate events will happen. So we need to be prepared for that, and we need to increase our resilience to that, because we know that will be happening. No matter we start doing the corrective measures over time, it will take time for this to go back to what we need it to be. If we go to the next slide, the other element which is important is to understand that these climatic shocks will increase inequalities more. Specifically, if we go to women-led households, we know that they are significantly more vulnerable to climate stress. For example, an annual heat stress will impact women over men in 8% more. This is around $37 billion. Annual extreme precipitation will impact women over men 3% more. We know that a 1 degree centigrade increase in average temperature will affect 34% of income of women more than men, and 24% of farm income. So for sure, this will exacerbate in the current situations the inequalities that we are facing. Now, if we look at the next slide on tomorrow, the projections we have ceteris paribus, the situation of today for tomorrow, which is in the next slide, is that we will be facing around 581.7 million people in hunger by 2030, which is 130 million more than what would have been if there was no COVID-19. So COVID-19 did have a significant shock and impact. Also the war in Ukraine, but the impact of COVID-19 is significantly bigger because of the intensity and because of the effect it has over the countries. Now, if we move to the next slide, my perception of what is going to happen in the 3
Can you
key
move next
drivers,
slide,
which is
please?
conflict,
Sorry.
climate.
Yeah, okay. I think the next one.
Okay, so in the 3 key drivers of conflict, climate, and economic crisis, first is that conflicts
Back, please.
are historically, and there are significant new political instabilities. So this will keep increasing unless we have a structural change. And we have been seeing what is happening right now in Africa, but also what is happening in Syria, and so on and so forward. We have a big problem in South Sudan. We have significant problems in DRC. Outside of course, Gaza and the dramatic situation in Gaza. So the situation, geopolitical situation, is critical and will affect it significantly. Although it's important to understand that the game in the world will change, because there will be bigger size of conflicts, and that's we can try to see if there is any opportunity that will allow us to reduce the conflicts that happens within countries right now. We are working today in predicting those. In climate, as I said before, frequency and intensity will increase. And economic crises, we have the bigger problem for poor countries, that they are debt stressed. Significant number of LDCs and countries are in a situation, which means that when the price of food increase, it's not only the impact of price of food, it's also the impact of exchange rate devaluation because of the increase of the global interest rates, the impact of the increase of interest on the debt they have to get to be able to cover their import bill, plus the debt that they have to service today, not only debt from international organizations, but also private debt. That means that they cannot cover for sure the food import bill, and that will create a significant problem in terms of access to food and access to quality food, which is a major challenge. So just to finalize, and I won't go in detail in this slide, if you go to the next one, I think the major job is, we know these risks are going to happen, how we can minimize those, and that's what we call resilience. It has 2 components: minimize risk that is being preventive, and the second one is how we can increase capacity of absorption. So if the shock happens, we are more ready for it to resolve it. Let me stop there, and thank you.
Thanks, Maximo, for the way forward, but unfortunately also those sobering views on where we stand. And Philippe, would you follow up, please?
Yes, with pleasure. What I would like to give you is a view coming from food markets. We have had, since the beginning of this decade, a period of many tensions on world food markets. It began, in fact, even before COVID, even before Ukraine. It began with the development, a huge rise of Chinese imports of grains. By 2021, China was importing 50 million tons of grain, wheat, corn, sorghum, and I remember that 50 million tons because that was exactly the tonnage of grain that formerly USSR was importing in 1980 when there was an embargo against USSR because USSR invaded Afghanistan. That's an old story. You remember there was something called USSR formerly. But they were importing 50 million tons. They were the world's biggest grain importer. Now, Black Sea, that is the former USSR, is the world's biggest exporter of wheat mainly, but of grain as a whole. USSR doesn't exist anymore. China is the world's biggest grain importer right now. So you see, history is changing. Then we had Ukraine, and with the idea that the Black Sea could be blocked, prices almost doubled. We reached $500 per ton for wheat. And then we had, and remember that on other products, for example, for my neighbor in Indonesia, they suffered with the embargo decided by the Indian authority on rice exports. What happened since then, and what's the situation right now? I would say normalization. We had rather good crops on a worldwide basis. You might have heard about El Niño or La Niña, but in recent months, we haven't had anything. Unfortunately, the only place where crops were not very good this year, it was France. But apart from that, we have very good crops on a worldwide basis, be it in the US, be it in Brazil, be it now in the Southern Hemisphere, Australia, Argentina, and so on. China is less on the market, and that's an important thing. And finally, India has had a very good monsoon. So prices now on worldwide food markets are more or less what they were before COVID and Ukraine. I told you that wheat price reached $500 per ton on around May 2022, and right now we are just at half that price. Russia is trying to have a kind of a minimum price, $250 per ton FOB Russian Black Sea port, but it doesn't work very well. And we have seen a very steep decline of prices for corn, soybeans, etc. If you want to see some excitation on markets, well, you're just coming out from your breakfast. It's clear that coffee, cocoa, orange juice, if you're from the Mediterranean, some olive oil in your breakfast, all those products have seen prices going up, generally for climatic reasons. But I would say that's a normal market history. You have had also some tensions. Two of my neighbors are directly concerned for sugar. Because in fact we have had 3 years of deficit on the worldwide sugar market and on palm oil. And on those two, there is an interesting link. That is, why is sugar prices pretty high? You don't know that, but India is the world's second normal sugar exporter, behind Brazil. This year, India won't export any sugar. because that sugar will be converted in ethanol. And there is a link, of course, between food and energy. Same story with Indonesia. In Indonesia, the government decided that you should put more palm oil in your diesel. And Indonesia is the world's biggest palm oil exporter. There is less palm oil in the market. Prices are going up. So you see the impact. What conclusion can we have on those 4 or 5 years? The first, in rich countries, we have had some impact on food inflation. You should ask Kamala Harris what she thinks about food inflation in the States. Also, it must be stressed that the share of agricultural products in the final food products is very slim. So when we say, especially in developed countries, but also in emerging countries, when you look at agricultural prices, it's fairly different from food prices. In our beloved French baguette, the share of wheat in bread is around 8%, not more. Far less than the cost of energy and the cost of the baker intervention. In poor countries, it's clear that you have had an impact on food poverty. And the countries which are managed finally to limit that are those that have, besides an agricultural policy, a food policy. You know that, for example, in India, 46% of agricultural subsidies go to consumption. Even more, in the States, in the United States, 55% of the US agricultural budget goes to food stamps, when in Africa, it's none. That's, I would say, the big difference, the problem between agricultural policy and food policy. Also, one interesting thing, as far as geopolitics are concerned, is that we have had a certain kind of return to the use of food as a weapon. I told you about the embargo, the American embargo of 1980. This year, Russia donated some wheat to some African countries, well, very well chosen, the one who are more or less supporting Russia in its aggression to Ukraine. But that's interesting. The use of food as a weapon, which has almost disappeared and which is coming back. We should look, by the way, next year, probably as to the rise of tariff on food by the Chinese authorities against US products. There has been a frenzy of soybean buying by Chinese companies to the US before the end of the year, before January the 20th and the arrival of Donald Trump. So globally, and I will conclude on that, to my mind, production, agricultural production, is not really a problem. There is sufficient food produced, sufficient agricultural products produced in the world to satisfy human needs. And I would be rather hopeful. When we were younger, Jean-Michel, there was a book written by Joseph Klassmann in France, Nourrir 10 milliards d'hommes, how to feed 10 billion people. I think the world will be able to feed 10 billion people. The problem is not there. The problem is a problem of poverty. Trade, I'm afraid to say, is not really the solution. Self-sufficiency, to my mind, should be a problem. Food poverty, when I listen to our friend in Rome, the problem, well, it can be on some markets, you can have a problem one year because of climate and so on. But on the whole, the big question to my mind is the question of food poverty. And that one, it can be averted probably both through agricultural and food policies. The problem is, I'm sometimes dreaming not of the very complex system of insurance, etc., which the FAO loves, but things pretty simple, like we had in Europe with the Common Agricultural Policy. The Common Agricultural Policy was a success. It allowed Europe to become not only self-sufficient, but an exporter. I'm sometimes dreaming of the equivalent of a Common Agricultural Policy in many African countries, for example, but at the end of the day, I have no answer to who pays for it. Mm.
Thank you very much, Philippe, to continue setting the landscape, normalization, permanence of structural issues, trade wars, geopolitics through subsidies, customs rights, etc. We're on the full game, and this optimistic note about the capacity of the world to produce for itself. And I know, Professor Krisnamurthi, dear Bayu, that you're going to follow up on some of those issues.
Thank you. Thank you to Thierry and Madame Kwon to invite me again with the same, I think the same panel, with the same topic. Unfortunately, like what Máximo already said, I cannot report to you much more cheerful progress on these issues. And again, really to what Philippe mentions, there are paradox. The numbers we can discuss on that because there are the difference with what Máximo has been presented. But hunger is alarming, that's one. But at the same time, it's also paradox because there is 1 billion meal that been wasted. And if that wasted meal could be distributed and reallocated to the hunger, then we can solve this problem instantly. So I agree with Philippe that the production is not necessarily the only problems, but food security and hunger related to many other issues, like, for example, when I use my example of my countries as well, the ASEAN region, you can see that Indonesia is, in that map, is most of them is green. It means secure in terms of food, but they are pocket. They are pocket. They are specific area with problem in food security and hunger. And that is also within the ASEAN countries. Singapore be the most secure in terms of food security, and Laos is the most insecure. But even the most secure country in the world for in terms of food, which is Finland, is the point is only 83.7. So it's not 100% covered and solve the food security problem. So there are pockets, there are specific area, even within those countries in France, in United States, that we face food insecurity. So this, I think, the issue of distributions, and of course, related with using the organizers' title of this session, which is the explosive problem. We also face, related with food, other explosive problem. I just use the SDGs here, the Sustainable Development Goals. Look at the 2023 target, and the whole Asia Pacific is come short from that target. So we fail to fulfill the Sustainable Development Goals by far. And some of the indicators even regression. It's not progressing, it's regressing. And if we look at the right-hand charts, you can see that almost all indicators for food security, we come short. So there are bigger problems than just production in agriculture I agree with you. We have to talk about food poverty. And again, I think one of the very basic key component is distribution. And of course, related with distribution is trade. And if we look at the numbers, then you can see that the global food economy now is estimated for about 10 trillion US dollars, and it's about 10% of the total world economy. But the food global trade is more than 2 trillion. So trade play a very important role within the food security and solving hunger. But even though we are increased in interdependency, now becoming shift to more on the processed food, there is a regional variations, unipolar and multipolars on that. And but the political trend within this is to become more protective. It's become, as you mentioned about the Indian put a ban for food and for political reason, I think. And not only Indian, there's about more than 20 countries who do the same policy, even Indonesia. So with that context, conflict and wars, again, in line with what Máximo had mentioned, becoming the #1 threat now for food security, climate uncertainty and weather extremes becoming really a threat, and as well as the damage factors. The economic slowdown, it's not helping the poor especially, and the increasing of resources constraint. I put farmers there because if you can see, you see all over the world, the farmers is getting old. They are becoming less attractive to young people, and it's becoming much more difficult to introduce new technology to them. That's why yesterday I'm asking about the AI, how the AI can be reached to the farmers. And of course, the social and political instability really related to uncertainty of policy and protectionism. And the potential global food solutions, of course, emergencies, food relief, better food distributions, opening up for food trade, I think that is very important. Sustainable food agriculture, and I like the approach by previous panel to see health as climate change issues, food and hunger as well is climate change issues, and of course technology. And biotech, I think we already 20, 30 years in the debate about GMO. I think we can come out to kind of resolutions on that, because biotech is much more than just GMO, but have a huge potential to solve problems, and including AI and IoT. And of course, the non-land-based food agriculture is becoming more and more popular in many countries. Reduce food loss and waste. I think that's another key factors that we need to talk about. And the role of private sectors. We now see more and more social entrepreneurs, private sectors. You see this as not as as the biggest margin in terms of business, but still can make a good profit doing and helping people solve their food problem. Global governance, I put that in with question mark, because actually the organization we have, FAO and others, but for the effectiveness that organizations and that governance still, I think, at least need to be reviewed, need to be have more approach, so we can solve the persistent problem of hunger and food insecurity. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bayu, and you're so right to mention this issue of global governance. Actually, we do not only deal with agriculture in FAO, but also in WTO, in the different COPs, climate, biodiversity, etc. But as a result, it's very difficult to have a real comprehensive dialogue on all the dimensions that you have mentioned that are so important, and especially as when it comes to agriculture, this is probably the one single production in which the world should be organized based on the comparative advantages of each and every place of the world, giving our very different natural dotations, and as a consequence, trust to allow exchanges should be at the core of our international community, and the least we can say is that it's not there. And I'm sure that Kamel will elaborate on that. You have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I know it's been a full-packed 2 days, and today is our last, so probably we have some mental fatigue. So we appreciate you still being with us and alert at this point. My name is Kamel, Abdallah, as mentioned, and I'll be talking at least on a regional perspective of this issue of hunger. By way of background, I've been involved in two large projects as MD CEO. I was the MD CEO of Baladna, a company that flew in cows and ensured self-sufficiency for Qatar in dairy, producing 100 million liters of milk per year within 2 years of an inception, which we later took public. And then I'm now at Canal Sugar, where our objective is to achieve for Egypt self-sufficiency in sugar by planting something like the size of Singapore as one single farm using smart agriculture. So I come more from the private sector versus the other views. Let's talk about the interest in hunger first. Of course, the UN SD goals, if you look, hunger is number 2, it's highlighted, but so are many other SD goals that are related to food and hunger. And probably the food agri angle is the most dominant angle, plus the health, which we explain, the connection is the most dominant angle in these SD goals. So when we redefine hunger, we look at the definition of hunger, it says clearly making sure all people, especially children, have sufficient, and I want to emphasize, and nutritious food all year. People, when they think of hunger, they think about making sure bellies are full. No, the definition of ending hunger is not having the bellies full, of having full with nutritious food. And indeed, I would argue the biggest problem we are facing is this particular issue, that the food is not nutritious. In the GCC, if you go to any construction site during work, what they do, they go and buy a multi-serve, long, big bottle of sugary drink, soda drink, it's sugar, to get the energy, but it's not nutritious, and that will have a lot of problems. Now, for us to have a nutritious food, yes, we need sustainable agriculture, we need to support farmers, we need access to land, technology, and markets, and I'll try to highlight where the private sector role will be here. So we really need to redefine in our mind whenever we hear the word hunger. Hunger is about not having nutritious food. It's not about just having food. And that's a very important distinction. Now, I do acknowledge that we have a dilemma, short-term versus long-term. Short-term, we can do what we have done, get them food, any kind of food, irrespective of whether this food could cause cancer down the road, obesity, which is a major problem, and worst concern is making our environment at risk by abusing the resources. Or do we go for a long-term positive approach, ensuring continuous access to nutritious food while ensuring sustainable practices in agriculture? And that's really the challenge, which I'll come back to. Now, as my colleagues have mentioned, these numbers were already mentioned, I want to go over them. But of course, hunger in areas of conflict is elementary. Whenever you have wars, you are going to have hunger because you have no access to food. The case in Gaza, which was extremely shocking, 2.5 million needing food, experiencing famine, while food trucks are next door waiting just to get to them. So while this is an important or essential problem, I'm not going to discuss it. And the answer to this particular problem is more political than economic and business. I just want to highlight here work for eat. I also managed project in Zimbabwe, and at one point, our workers' union came to me when I was visiting as MD CEO and requested that they do not be paid salaries. They do not be paid salaries, but rather receive basket of goods every week. It was at a time when $1 went from being equal 5 Zimbabwean dollar to being equal to 1 trillion Zimbabwean dollar, and the food and the money became useless. And the essence was we want to work for food, which sadly was a practice a couple of hundred years back in many societies. I just want to highlight one thing is when we talk about, I follow the feminine, and I encourage you to look at it, feminine early warning system, which is part of the USAID funding network to give you advance warning whenever you see potential famine happening. But my colleagues have mentioned the areas that are at risk there. But it's an important tool as well as other tools to give you advance warning on this. So back to the GCC. In the GCC and in North Africa and in the Middle East, we have a problem. Most of our land does not produce food. It ranges between something like 3 to 10% at max of our land, the deserts. Okay, our land, 90% of it is not desert, and around 90% of our land is desert. Now, in the old days, the desert, you couldn't do much with it. No soil, no water, no electricity. Okay, thank God with advances in technology, we are allowed to address these three problems. We can move the soil to have organic soil. We can dig for water. Indeed, at Canal Sugar, we have over 400 wells dug. Of course, this has an impact on the underground water, the aquifer. And, of course, we can generate now electricity. So technology is allowing us to address these problems. What the GCC countries and the region did under food security ignored an important part, which is health. The problem is in the region, we have major health crises. And I want to come back to it, especially, for example, diabetes, where in the region it kicks in at about age 35 versus at about age 47 in other parts of the world. And I want people to start thinking always, whenever they look at nutrition or agriculture budgets, to look at health budget. We need to always think the Ministry of Health budget and the Ministry of Agriculture budget whenever we're trying to solve this one problem. Because if we feed them unnutritious, unhealthy food, and they end up with diabetes, I will have to spend money for 20 to 30 years on insulin trying to cover the original problem that I created. Please keep that in mind. This is the challenge. For us before, it was all about affordability and availability. Bring the food, give it to the poor, the hungry, make it cheap, affordable, and get it access. This is no longer our immediate problem. We are sorting it, you know. But I want you to remember, more people are dying from obesity-related diseases than from famine-related issues. And so for us now, food security is about healthy, nutritious food. And that's what the programs that we are working on, that I'm working on, is involved with. Health budgets in the GCC and in Egypt, okay, and in the other countries in the region are increasing exponentially. Governments are spending exponential amount of money subsidizing medicines to treat these diseases. If that money goes into preventive, into proper nutritious food, it is going to solve a lot of problems now and down the road. So just on food security, I want you to look at the right and the left, just two items. Don't bother yourself with everything in the middle, which is private sector businesses we do. The issues are water, soil, energy, and then health and wellness. And food is about those. If we can manage one and the other, the cause and the effect, preserve water, ensure healthy soil, and get the proper energy used, then if we will end up with a healthy, nutritious people. This is the challenge put in a different way from an economic perspective. How do we ensure sustainable agriculture while keeping viable ecosystems and an economist's dream, this equitable communities inclusion, food inclusion for the poor, food inclusion for the women, and food inclusion for the rural areas. Again, the beauty of smart agriculture or precision farming is now it's cheap enough to give it to farmers. I work now, last year I started working with 6,000 farmers. Now we are reaching about 12,000. By next year, we'll hit 20,000 small farmers, each one having 1 hectare. And now the technology is affordable, and guess what? All of them use so-called smartphones. Now, granted, they watch YouTube and Instagram and follow entertainment, but equally they can access tools to help them. And that's what we are doing and working with NGOs in the Side in Egypt to ensure that they have access to these tools. Ending hunger, we have a lot of dilemmas, a lot of tension. First tension is within governments itself. Multiple jurisdiction. You have ministries of agriculture that conflict with the ministries of water, irrigation. One controls above ground, one controls underground, that conflict with ministries of health. We have the issue of cost reduction in profits and capturing carbon, reducing carbon for food manufacturing, which is an important issue that's raising cost. Consumers have different kind of problems. They love plastic bottles because they are cheaper and more consistent, okay? But of course, this is not sustainable. And finally, as producers, we have issues under ESG because a lot of agriculture works with minors and works with under social practices, things that are not yet accepted or compliant with ESG. So just to finish this, small is beautiful. This is in our view, the solution. Stick to local communities, use technology, let the private sector do the job. Most important, get people to eat healthier and less food and stop wasting 1 billion, as my colleague said, 1 billion tons of food every year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kamel, not only for setting the landscape of challenges, but also moving us into the agenda of solutions, including precise farming, which is of major importance, and setting the landscape also for our region. And we'll continue with the agenda of solutions also with you, Jean-Marc. You have the floor for our last intervention today.
Thank you, Jean-Michel. I will speak in French, so maybe I give you some time to take your headphones. D'abord, je voudrais remercier Thierry de Montbrial et Madame Conde pour me permettre d'intervenir devant vous aujourd'hui. Évidemment, vous devez vous poser la question, quel est le rapport entre le secteur spatial et la problématique de ce panel? C'est vrai que le secteur spatial est plus connu pour sa composante de souveraineté, de défense ou pour l'exploration. Mais j'aimerais vous donner quelques exemples aujourd'hui qui montrent, comme ça a été dit précédemment, que la technologie, que les données spatiales permettent de relever un certain nombre de défis liés à l'alimentation mondiale. Tout d'abord, je voudrais rappeler pour l'audience quelles sont les caractéristiques des données spatiales. Le premier satellite d'observation de la Terre a été lancé en 1972 par les États-Unis. Il s'appelait Landsat et il a commencé à prendre des photos de l'ensemble de la surface de la Terre. Depuis lors, ce sont des milliers de satellites qui sont au-dessus de nos têtes, qui sont bourrés de capteurs, qui permettent de prendre des photos, de faire des mesures de la composition de l'atmosphère, de mesurer la température du sol, la salinité des océans, etc. L'ensemble de ces données sont essentiellement à la disposition de la communauté scientifique pour mieux connaître l'évolution de notre planète et en particulier pour le changement climatique. Parmi les 50 paramètres utilisés par le GIEC pour comprendre et prédire l'évolution du climat de notre planète, la moitié sont donnés par des satellites, notamment l'élévation du niveau des océans, qui est de 3 à 4 mm par an et qui est connue depuis plusieurs années. Évidemment, ces données sont absolument fondamentales pour la science, mais elles donnent lieu aussi à des applications extrêmement concrètes et très locales. C'est évidemment vrai pour les communications dans les zones blanches, la navigation, la géolocalisation que nous avons tous dans nos téléphones, mais aussi pour la météo. Les prévisions météo ont fait des progrès considérables grâce aux données des satellites. Pour la prévention des catastrophes, on peut détecter les feux de forêt très précisément avec des satellites, avec un préavis de quelques minutes, les inondations, et évidemment, quand il y a des catastrophes naturelles, grâce aux satellites, on peut aussi s'adapter et fournir au secours des informations vitales pour aider les populations. Ces données, elles sont universelles. L'intérêt des données spatiales, c'est qu'elles sont globales sur la Terre, elles ont des échelles de temps qui sont très longues et donc elles sont utilisables de manière universelle. Le spatial se prête à des coopérations, justement compte tenu de ce caractère universel. Et ce qui est absolument fondamental aujourd'hui, c'est que grâce aux technologies, grâce à la miniaturisation, grâce à la digitalisation, grâce à la réduction du coût d'accès à l'espace avec les lanceurs réutilisables, on a de plus en plus de satellites et les données sont de moins en moins chères et même dans certains cas, elles sont gratuites. Je voudrais en particulier mentionner le programme Copernicus de l'Union européenne qui délivre chaque jour 30 terabits de données utilisables par tout un chacun sur l'ensemble de la surface de la Terre. Alors, 3 exemples pour illustrer comment le spatial peut aider pour relever les défis de l'alimentation. Le premier, c'est l'eau, ressource critique s'il en est. Il se trouve, et c'est assez remarquable, qu'avec des satellites, on peut mesurer les niveaux d'eau sur la Terre. On a commencé par les océans, je l'ai mentionné, mesure de l'élévation du niveau des océans. Aujourd'hui, on peut le faire pour les lacs et les rivières avec une précision d'1 centimètre et avec une donnée qui est fournie tous les jours. Ça permet d'avoir au niveau d'un bassin versant une estimation non seulement de la ressource en eau à un instant T, mais avec des modèles de prévision météo, avec l'intelligence artificielle, d'avoir des prévisions de l'évolution de ces ressources jusqu'à l'échelle d'années. Évidemment, c'est extrêmement important, en complément des mesures in situ, pour les décideurs, pour décider d'arbitrer sur l'utilisation des ressources entre l'alimentation humaine, l'agriculture, l'hydroélectricité, par exemple. Le fait d'avoir une mesure objective, globale, disponible, permet de prendre des décisions éclairées sur l'utilisation des ressources en eau. Évidemment, c'est aussi particulièrement important quand les bassins versants appartiennent à des pays différents qui souvent sont en conflit pour l'utilisation de cette ressource en eau. La deuxième utilisation, évidemment, des données spatiales que je voudrais mentionner, c'est l'agriculture, et ça a été aussi mentionné par mon voisin. Aujourd'hui, avec les données spatiales, on peut connaître très précisément l'état des sols de manière globale et avec une échelle qui se réduit, ce qui permet effectivement d'avoir des données qui sont parcelle par parcelle. On peut connaître l'état de l'humidité des sols, ce qui permet de prendre des décisions éclairées sur l'irrigation, sur les entrants, de façon à minimiser les entrants, ce qui permet évidemment d'optimiser l'utilisation de l'eau et l'utilisation des entrants. Et aussi, on peut prévoir l'évolution des températures au niveau des parcelles, ce qui permet de prendre des décisions sur l'évolution des cultures qui seront adaptées compte tenu du réchauffement global dans une région donnée. Alors, on peut avoir l'impression que ces technologies sont réservées aux pays riches qui peuvent s'équiper d'instruments coûteux au niveau de l'agriculture. C'est pour ça que je voudrais prendre l'exemple de l'Inde qui a mis en place un système extrêmement performant de mise à disposition de chaque agriculteur d'informations d'origine spatiale, mais pas que, pour prendre des décisions sur l'exploitation agricole. Ça fonctionne comment? Vous avez un numéro de téléphone gratuit qui est utilisable par tous les agriculteurs en Inde. Donc ils appellent, ils ont en face d'eux un opérateur qui détecte précisément l'origine de l'appel, qui a devant lui des écrans avec des informations satellites et non satellites qui permettent de donner des conseils sur l'irrigation, de donner des conseils sur les prévisions météo, les risques de catastrophes, de façon à ce que l'agriculteur indien, qui ne dispose que d'un téléphone effectivement pour utiliser ces informations-là, puisse prendre des décisions journalières sur l'exploitation agricole de sa parcelle. Ce qui montre bien, et ça a été aussi mentionné par mon collègue, qu'aujourd'hui, ces technologies sont accessibles pour tout un chacun pour améliorer les exploitations agricoles. Dernier exemple que je voudrais donner, l'espace pour l'océan. L'océan représente 15% de l'alimentation mondiale, évidemment beaucoup plus dans certaines régions maritimes. L'espace permet évidemment de connaître l'état des océans dans un contexte de réchauffement global, ce qui améliore nos prévisions scientifiques. On peut aussi détecter les pollutions très facilement avec les satellites. On peut lutter contre la pêche illégale. Les bateaux fantômes peuvent être détectés par des satellites, par des moyens optiques, ou simplement en écoutant les émissions radar et en faisant une corrélation entre les émissions radar qui sont toutes différentes et les bateaux en question. Et tout ça, évidemment, nous permet d'avoir une meilleure optimisation des ressources des océans pour l'alimentation et pour d'autres applications. Je voudrais d'ailleurs mentionner qu'il y aura une conférence des Nations Unies en juin 2025 à Nice et qu'à cette occasion, l'ensemble des acteurs mondiaux de l'espace prévoit de créer une alliance du spatial pour les océans, pour mettre à disposition l'ensemble de leurs données spatiales au profit d'une meilleure compréhension et d'une meilleure préservation de l'océan. Et puis, dernière mention, je voudrais mentionner le Space for Climate Observatory, qui est une proposition de la France en 2019 vis-à-vis de l'ensemble de nos partenaires internationaux. Aujourd'hui, c'est supporté par les Nations Unies. 50 pays y participent, dont les Émirats arabes unis. C'est une collection de projets qui sont extrêmement locaux, qui permettent d'avoir une mise à disposition des données spatiales pour des problématiques liées au changement climatique. Un exemple, au Vietnam, la problématique de l'évolution des rizières dans le contexte du réchauffement global et avec des entrées d'eau saline dans les rizières se pose de manière extrêmement critique. Et grâce à un projet que l'on conduit avec le Vietnam, on peut faire des prévisions sur que seront les conditions d'exploitation de ces rizières dans les 10 ans à venir, ce qui permet de prendre des décisions éclairées sur l'implantation de ces rizières au niveau extrêmement local. Merci pour votre attention.
Thank you so much, Jean-Marc, for having introduced us into a new innovation dimension. In our last sessions, the previous years, we had mentioned on other innovative dimensions. For instance, we addressed the issue of cellular food and beyond agriculture and nutrition. And there we are back to an extent to the basics of the agri field, making agriculture itself more productive and efficient. And it has been wonderful to see how we have a new instrument to address this very important channel. Now, we have a few minutes until the end of our panel, and I would like to take advantage of it to put to our colleagues one question that I would like them to answer in 1 minute. If we are, thank God, all of us together again next year here, what would you like to say as a positive development that you would like to share with us? So in 1 year, what would be the one single positive thing that you would like to be able to tell to our audience? Surprise question. Máximo, 1 minute, if you can hear us. I'm not sure Máximo can hear us. So then I will move to Philippe, and then maybe we get a chance to know.
Okay.
Here he is.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can.
Hello?
We can hear you, Tim. Máximo.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
That will be the one thing we'd like
Yes,
to
the one
happen
positive
next
thing that we like to tell you next year is we can hear you.
I can hear you, but can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
He's not hearing us.
Maybe I can take a quick answer while he...
So let's go ahead while our
fusion-
colleagues try to fix the connection issue.
The fusion of technology to small farmers and changing habits of people. These are the two things, not one I would hope to see next year, and we at Canal Sugar are working on both of them.
Okay, precise answer. Anyone? Yes, Bayu.
Yes. If next year I can probably tell you the development of private sector's involvement in these issues. We initiate what we call it as a partnership in Indonesian sustainable agriculture. And within that context, maybe about 60 to 7% is food and how we solve food problem. And I think that is becoming, developing quite promising. And hopefully by next year, we will touch about 2.5 million farmers with an approach for food security.
Great, massive target, 1 million, 1 additional million farmers targeted by this private sector initiative. Philippe?
Well, my dream would be more on Africa and sub-Saharan Africa, which is, as you saw on all maps, the main problem as far as food is concerned. Remember, 1 billion people more in 2050, and that's where food poverty is the most acute. In 2003, 2003, there was a summit in Maputo where African countries decided to try to reach 10% of the public budget to agriculture. Now there's only one country, and I'm not even sure it's the case, only one country in Africa devotes 10% of its budget to agriculture. It seems to be Ethiopia. Unfortunately, in many African countries, it's far less. My dream would be that as many African countries as possible would have real agricultural policies. Not the kind of development, but policies like you have in Indonesia or even in Egypt, with guaranteed price for farmers and even some subsidized prices for the poor. But it's really a dream, so next year I'm
Yes.
ready.
Let's make your dream happen.
I have a dream.
So Africa, every country with a solid agri-food policy and 10% of its budget on agri. I think it's right now around 3%. So we have a big gap, but we'll make it. Jean-Marc.
J'ai mentionné l'exemple indien qui a parfaitement su réduire la barrière entre la technologie et l'utilisateur final pour répondre à ses besoins. Bien sûr, j'aimerais que ça soit généralisé, en particulier dans les pays pour lesquels l'insécurité alimentaire est la plus importante et que cet exemple se diffuse de manière universelle.
Great. Also very concrete. India's innovation leading the world and being spread. Good. I don't know whether we have lost Máximo or not, because he's not on the screen anymore.
He disappeared.
So unfortunately, he will not be able to contribute to this last question. We may have the time for 1 or 2 short questions, if there is any. Sir, here.
Yeah.
Yeah, the mic is coming.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank all of you for the excellent remarks. I think it was a very comprehensive, dealing of the subject. So thank you for that. 2 things. I must say I agree with all of you regarding food supply. I mean, over the past 10 years, global food production has actually increased from 2.5 billion tons per year to 3.1. Per capita, that's about 2,800 calories. 10 years ago to 3,000 now, that's a 7% increase. But obviously, Mr. Abdallah, I think, touched on that point, that it's the quality of the food is obviously, we don't know if it's been better quality or not. That's one issue. And the second issue, obviously, is the availability and distribution, which is just not evenly distributed.
I'm sorry, we have very little time, so your question, please.
One thing that I think, one aspect that we're missing regarding affordability is actually that commodities worldwide mostly are traded in US dollars. US dollar over the past 4 years has depreciated 25%, which means actually that food prices have increased 25% for many countries around the world. And I'd just like to ask you, in the geopolitical terms, there's a lot of talk about de-dollarization and so on, moving away from the dollar, bilateral trade. How do you think this affects affordability in the future?
Okay. Thank you, sir. Maybe, is there another question in the room? because we have very little time. Sir, yeah, thank you. But please, please be very brief. We have only 2 minutes left.
Just 1 minute. I'm from Israel and just want to raise one of the nice things happening in Israel about food. There is an organization, a non-profit organization, which creates a situation we call collection. What they do, it go to every place in which they have a lot of food and a lot of weddings, etc. And they collect all the food that rests over there and spread it to the needy people, which work fantastic. They arrive to really use big quantities of food, which usually will be thrown to the garbage and feed by that people who need it.
Okay,
I think it could be
so not a question, but just an information you would like to share. Thank you. So we have 1 minute left. Some of you would like to address the exchange rate issue.
Well,
yeah, Bayu as well.
On the dollar issue, well, it's simple. All commodities markets, be it food, be it energy, be it metals, are in this world quoted in dollars. Point. I know that, for example, at the recent BRICS meeting in Kazan, they said, well, we should try to develop a new commodity market eventually in Moscow in order to be able to quote products well, in another currency. You won't quote them in ruble. For the moment, the minimum price which the Russian government is trying to put in the Black Sea, it's in dollar. So I think it's a non-subject. The world, all world markets are in dollar, and well, you profit of it sometime. Sometime you suffer from it. You have to live with it. Normally, you have a correlation on a long-term basis when the dollar raises, commodity prices go down, and when dollar goes down, commodity prices quoted in dollar go up. That works more or less, even though that right now the dollar is also a commodity currency because US are exporting natural gas, energy products, etc. So the correlation is less effective. But
Philippe,
don't dream, you will never, even though, for example,
sorry,
wheat prices,
Philippe,
wheat prices are quoted in Europe, in euro, but you translate it immediately in dollar.
Thank you.
Well, sorry.
Bayu, before we get ousted of the stage, 10 seconds, because you wanted to say a word on...
Yes, I think the first, we now, at least from this panel, we can say the most important thing is not only food security, but nutrition security. That's one point. Second, probably, again, trade and private sectors is very important for combating hunger. And trust becoming key again and again, like in health as well as in food. So we need to build that trust again so we can solve hunger problem.
I see that Máximo is back on the screen. Have we got 1 minute or not? Máximo, I'm sorry, we are ousted of the stage because we have to leave the room for the next session. I'm sorry for the technical issue of communication. We apologize for that. We thank you also for giving your time, dedicating your time from Rome. Great applause to our panelists who have done a great job. Thanks so much. Thanks once more for the WPC for this agri-session.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin the next session, we would like to remind you that we will be hosting our guests this evening at the Beach House for a private World Policy Conference reception, which is near the beach on the same property. If you would like to join us, the ladies at the registration desk will be able to provide more information.